My name is Emily Carter, and I never imagined I would be sharing this story. For a long time, I kept it to myself, unsure of how people would react, but the weight of what I experienced was too much to bear alone. I knew deep inside that I had to tell the world, not for fame, not for recognition, but because what I saw changed me forever. It was October 5th, 2023, a day like any other, until it wasn't. A routine drive home turned into the most profound moment of my existence. I was pronounced dead for 6 minutes and 42 seconds, but in that short time, I saw something beyond imagination. I encountered Jesus, and he revealed a truth that had been hidden for generations, a truth about identity, power, and the deception that has kept it buried. If you're listening to this, it's not by accident. You were meant to hear this. You were meant to know. It started like any other day. I woke up, made my morning coffee, kissed my husband goodbye, and headed to work. The routine was comforting, predictable. I was a nurse at St. Luke's Hospital, working the night shift. The job was demanding, but I loved it. Helping people, easing their pain. It gave my life purpose. That night was no different. I checked on patients, administered medication, and completed my rounds. There were no warnings, no premonitions, no sense that something was about to happen. When my shift ended, exhaustion settled in. I longed for the warmth of my bed, the embrace of my husband, the quiet peace of home. I climbed into my car, turned on the radio, and started my usual drive. The streets were quiet. The rain had just begun to fall, and everything felt normal. But normal was about to shatter. 5 minutes from home, I saw the headlights. Blinding, erratic. My heart pounded as I realized the car was out of control, swerving straight toward me. I slammed on my brakes, but it was too late. The impact was brutal, a force so immense it felt like the world had collapsed around me. Metal twisted, glass shattered, my body flung forward. And then, silence. No pain, no fear, just an eerie stillness. I expected panic. Instead, there was peace. I could see the wreckage, my own lifeless body trapped inside, but I wasn't there anymore. I was above it, watching, detached yet fully aware. That's when I knew I was dead. Confusion gripped me. How could I be looking down at myself? How could I be thinking, feeling, existing outside of my body? Then in the distance, a light appeared. Not just any light, this was different. It wasn't coming from a source. It was everywhere, surrounding me, filling me with a warmth I had never known. It called to me, pulled me toward it, and I didn't resist. The world below faded, and I surrendered to whatever was next. I expected nothingness, an end. Instead, I found something more real than anything I had ever known. The moment I crossed into the light, a presence enveloped me. Powerful yet gentle, overwhelming yet comforting. It was then that I heard the voice. "Emily, do not be afraid." A voice so familiar, so filled with love, it left no doubt. I turned, and there he was, Jesus, the one I had prayed to all my life, the one I had believed in but never expected to see. My soul recognized him instantly. Every fear, every doubt, every question vanished in his presence. He reached out his hand, and as his fingers touched mine, a flood of energy surged through me, not just warmth, life itself. He smiled, and in that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The moment Jesus touched my hand, everything changed. A rush of energy flowed through me, unlike anything I had ever felt. It was more than warmth. It was life itself, filling every part of me, erasing every fear, every doubt. I wanted to stay in that moment forever, basking in his presence, feeling the overwhelming love that radiated from him. But I knew he had brought me here for a reason. This was not just a meeting. It was a revelation. He looked into my eyes, and in that gaze, I felt as if he had known me for eternity. Every secret, every struggle, every pain I had ever endured, he saw it all. Yet there was no judgment, no disappointment, only love. A love so deep, so pure. It felt like the very foundation of my being was shifting. "Emily," he said, his voice both gentle and commanding, "there is something you must see." His words carried weight, an urgency that I couldn't ignore. Without warning, the space around us shifted. The brilliant light gave way to something entirely different. I was no longer standing before Jesus in a radiant glow. I was somewhere else entirely. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. A vast city stretched before me, unlike anything I had ever seen. It was ancient yet untouched, majestic yet unfamiliar. Golden structures towered above, glowing with an energy I couldn't comprehend. The air itself seemed alive, humming with wisdom, history, and something more, truth. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding with awe. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. His expression remained steady, filled with a quiet intensity. "This," he said, "is what was lost." As he spoke, the city around us seemed to breathe, shifting and moving as if responding to his words. The streets were filled with people, men and women of strength and dignity, clothed in garments of royalty. Their skin shimmered under the golden light, their presence radiating authority, knowledge, and power. I watched in wonder as they moved with purpose, their heads held high, their voices filled with wisdom. They were not slaves, not broken, not oppressed. They were leaders, scholars, warriors, and priests. "These," Jesus continued, "are my chosen ones." His words sent a chill through me. I had never seen history portrayed like this. Everything I had been taught, everything I had believed about the past, it was different from what I was seeing now. I wanted to question, to challenge, but in my heart, I already knew. This was the truth. A deep sorrow filled Jesus's eyes. "The world rewrote their story," he said. "They were told they were nothing when in truth they were everything." My chest tightened as his words settled within me. How could this be? How could an entire history be erased, replaced with lies? I wanted to look away, to deny what I was seeing, but Jesus' presence held me firm. "You must understand," he continued, "because the time has come for the truth to be known." I swallowed hard, trying to process the weight of his words. My entire understanding of the world, of history, of who we are, it was unraveling before me. But deep inside, something else stirred. A knowing, a recognition that I had been blind to something far greater than I had ever realized. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Jesus' gaze softened, but his next words carried an undeniable urgency. "Now," he said, "you must see what was taken." The golden city before me began to shift, and suddenly, I was no longer there. The shimmering structures, the people filled with wisdom and grace, they faded, replaced by something far darker. A deep weight settled over my chest as I realized where I was. The streets were no longer paved with gold, and the air no longer carried the hum of knowledge. Instead, there was sorrow, pain, chains. I saw people, the same people I had just seen walking in dignity, now bound in iron shackles. Their once proud faces were etched with anguish, their voices no longer filled with wisdom but with cries of suffering. Their hands, once raised in knowledge, now struggled against their restraints. I gasped, my heart hammering against my ribs. This couldn't be. How had they gone from royalty to captivity, from power to oppression? Jesus stood beside me, his expression grave yet unwavering. "This," he said, "is what was stolen." His voice carried both sorrow and strength, as if he himself had wept for what had happened. The enemy feared them, so he took everything. Their history, their identity, their power. He did not just enslave their bodies, he enslaved their minds. His words sent chills down my spine. I had always known of slavery, of oppression, of suffering, but I had never seen it through this lens. The vision shifted again. I saw lies being written, history being rewritten. I saw generations being told they were inferior, that they had no past worth remembering, no future worth building. I saw families torn apart, their traditions erased, their faith manipulated. They were never meant to be slaves, Jesus continued. They were meant to lead, to teach, to heal. But the enemy feared their faith, their unshakable connection to me. So, he tried to sever it. Tears filled my eyes as I watched mothers clutch their children, fathers dragged away in chains, entire communities stripped of their knowledge. "Why?" I whispered, barely able to speak through the lump in my throat. "Why did this happen?" Jesus' eyes met mine, filled with both sorrow and unwavering resolve. "Because when they wake up," he said, "when they remember who they are, the world will never be the same." A new kind of energy coursed through me, not just grief but something else, something deeper, a realization, a fire. But the time of awakening has come, Jesus declared. The truth can no longer be hidden. As he spoke, the vision shifted once more, and I braced myself for what was next. The chains that once bound them began to break. One by one, I saw them shatter, falling to the ground like dust. The sorrow that had once filled the air was replaced with something else. Strength. I saw the same people, but now they stood taller. Their eyes, once filled with despair, now burned with something unshakable. I turned to Jesus, breathless. "They're free?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. He nodded, but his expression remained serious. "Freedom is not only of the body, Emily. True freedom is of the mind, the spirit. The enemy's greatest weapon was not the chains you saw. It was the deception that kept them believing they were still bound." His words sent a chill through me. This wasn't just about history. This was about now. I watched as generations rose up, reclaiming their strength. I saw them rediscover their faith, their purpose, their divine identity. They were no longer asking for permission. They were stepping into what had always been theirs. "This," Jesus said, "is the beginning of the awakening." His voice carried a weight, a certainty that settled deep into my soul. Yet, as the vision continued, I saw something else. A darkness lurking at the edges, waiting. It didn't attack with chains or violence. It attacked with something far more dangerous. Lies, manipulation, distractions. I saw a world that wanted them to forget again, to turn away from what they were rediscovering. "The battle is not over," Jesus warned. "Now that they are waking up, the enemy will fight harder than ever." A sense of urgency flooded me. "How do they fight back?" I asked. Jesus turned to me, his gaze unwavering. "By knowing the truth, by rejecting the deception, by standing firm in who they are, even when the world tries to make them doubt." His voice echoed around me, powerful, undeniable. "And that is why you must tell them." My heart pounded. I felt the weight of his words, the responsibility they carried. This wasn't just a revelation, it was a mission. "Will they listen?" I asked, uncertainty creeping in. Jesus' eyes softened, but his response was resolute. "Those who have ears to hear will hear. Those who seek will find. The time has come, Emily. Now you must see what happens next." The world around me shifted again, and I found myself standing in the present. It was no longer a vision of the past, but of now. I saw cities, streets filled with people, screens broadcasting messages, governments making decisions. But something felt different. There was a stirring, a shifting. The world was changing. I saw people searching, questioning everything they had been told. I saw them rejecting the narratives that had been forced upon them. I saw a hunger for truth awakening within them. "They are beginning to see," Jesus said, watching with me. "But the enemy is not finished." His voice carried a warning, and as I looked closer, I understood why. I saw systems in place, designed to keep them from stepping into their identity. I saw distractions, entertainment that kept their minds numbed. I saw leaders who claimed to speak for them, but were only repeating the enemy's lies. "He no longer needs chains," Jesus said. "He uses comfort. He keeps them complacent, unaware of what they truly are capable of." A deep frustration built within me. "Then how do they break free?" I asked, my voice filled with urgency. Jesus turned to me, his expression filled with both love and authority. "They must seek me, not the world's version of me, not the watered-down teachings they have been given, but the real me. When they do, the deception will crumble." His words hit me like a force, resonating deep within my spirit. This wasn't just a message for them. It was a message for me, for all of us. The battle was not just external, it was internal. It was a war for the mind, for the soul, and the only way to win was through truth. As I looked back at the vision, I saw something incredible. People waking up, rejecting the lies, seeking God with a hunger they had never known before. It was happening. The awakening was real, and nothing could stop it now. The vision before me grew clearer, and I could feel the weight of what I was witnessing settling deep within my soul. The people who had once been bound were awakening, stepping into a truth that had been hidden from them for generations. But as their eyes opened, as their voices grew stronger, I saw something else. A resistance. a force rising to silence them, to push them back into the shadows. At first, it was subtle. It didn't come in the form of chains or whips. It came through manipulation. I saw news reports distorting reality, portraying those who sought the truth as radicals, as troublemakers. I saw social movements being hijacked, their messages twisted until they no longer reflected the real struggle. I saw leaders being handpicked, not to uplift, but to pacify, to keep people distracted and divided. Jesus stood beside me, his expression calm but firm. "The enemy has changed his strategy," he said. "Before, he used oppression to keep them down. Now, he uses deception to keep them blind." His words sent a shiver through me. The battle had never ended. It had only evolved. And the weapons were no longer physical but mental, emotional, and spiritual. I saw entire industries built around controlling narratives, ensuring that the truth never reached the masses. Movies, music, media, all carefully crafted to keep people entertained, distracted, and most importantly, unaware of their true power. It was as if an invisible prison had been built around them, one where the walls were made of illusions. I turned to Jesus, my heart heavy. "How do they fight something they cannot see?" I asked. He looked at me with an intensity that burned into my soul. "By seeking the truth. By turning away from the noise and listening to the voice inside them, the voice that has always been calling them back to me." His words carried an authority that shook me. This was the answer, but it was not an easy path. As I looked closer, I saw that not everyone would listen. Some would reject the truth, clinging to the comforts of deception because it was easier. I saw people mocking those who spoke out, calling them foolish, paranoid. I saw others afraid, hesitant to step into the unknown. "Not all will wake up," Jesus said, his voice filled with both sorrow and certainty. "But those who do will change everything." The vision shifted once more, and I saw something even more disturbing. A new kind of system was emerging, one more advanced, more powerful than anything before. It was not built on chains, but on control, on rewards for obedience and punishment for defiance. Those who conformed were given access to resources, opportunities, success. Those who resisted were cast out, shunned, silenced. I saw families divided over these choices, some choosing to submit to the system for the sake of security, others standing firm in faith despite the consequences. It was heartbreaking to watch. Parents begging their children to comply so they wouldn't suffer. Friends turning against each other, calling resistance foolish. Communities fracturing under the pressure. I turned to Jesus, my breath shallow. "This is happening now, isn't it?" I asked. He nodded. "The foundations have already been laid. Soon the choice will no longer be subtle. It will be clear, and all will have to decide." His words sent chills through me. This was not just a warning for the distant future. It was a revelation of what was unfolding before our very eyes. As I continued watching, I saw the deception reaching even into the churches. Some spiritual leaders, instead of speaking truth, had become part of the system. They preached comfort instead of conviction, tolerance instead of transformation. They told people what they wanted to hear, rather than what they needed to know. "The enemy has infiltrated even my house," Jesus said, his voice filled with both grief and righteous anger. But then, I saw something else, something that made my heart pound with hope. I saw a remnant, a group of believers who refused to bow. They stood firm, unmoved by the pressures of the world. They were not the ones with the biggest platforms, the loudest voices, or the most influence in society, but they carried something far more powerful. They carried truth. I saw them gathering in homes, in small churches, in secret places, not to hide, but to strengthen one another. They encouraged, they prayed, they prepared. They were ready, not for war in the physical sense, but for a spiritual battle unlike any before. "These," Jesus said, looking at them with pride, "are my warriors." And as he spoke, I saw something incredible. The remnant was growing. The resistance against deception was not loud. It was not publicized, but it was real. I saw it spreading in whispers, in conversations behind closed doors, in families choosing to educate themselves instead of relying on the narratives fed to them. It was in the young who refused to be molded by a system that sought to define them. It was in the elders who passed down knowledge that could not be erased. The enemy fought back harder, New laws were introduced, policies designed to silence dissent. Social pressure increased, making it nearly impossible to speak truth without consequences. Many who had once stood firm began to waver. Fear took hold of them, fear of losing their jobs, their reputations, their comforts. But in the midst of it all, I saw something extraordinary. Miracles, supernatural provision. Those who stood for truth were not left abandoned. Food multiplied when resources were scarce. Doors opened where none had existed before. Divine encounters happened in places no one expected. Jesus turned to me, a knowing smile on his face. "Have I ever failed my people?" he asked. His question was rhetorical, but it pierced my heart with conviction. I saw Black men and women rising in faith, in wisdom, in leadership, not because they were given permission, but because they had been called. They stepped into positions of influence not through manipulation, but through divine favor. They built communities that thrived outside of the system, relying not on what the world gave them, but on what God had already placed within them. The enemy tried one last desperate move: division. He planted seeds of doubt, of infighting, of petty disagreements to weaken the movement from within. But I saw something incredible. Those who had truly awakened saw through it. They refused to be turned against one another. They chose unity, not as a trend, but as a divine command. Jesus looked at me, his eyes blazing. "They will try to divide them," he said, "but they will not succeed, because my people are remembering who they are." And with those words, the vision shifted again. What I saw next made my breath catch in my throat. It was the final battle. The air around me crackled with intensity as the vision unfolded before my eyes. I saw a world on the edge, two forces colliding, two realities competing for control. Those who had awakened stood firm, their eyes filled with clarity, their hearts unshaken by the illusions around them. But the enemy was relentless. He knew his time was short, and his final deception would be his most dangerous yet. It did not come through war or destruction. It came through peace. At least, that's what they called it. A new order, a new system, a new way of life that promised equality, prosperity, and safety. I saw leaders rising, speaking with conviction, their voices broadcasted across the world. "We must unite," they said. "We must put aside our differences, our beliefs, and embrace a new era." Their words were smooth, persuasive, calculated. At first it seemed beautiful. No more division, no more suffering. People embraced the idea with open arms, desperate for relief from the chaos. But I saw what lay beneath. It was not peace. It was control. Those who accepted it flourished: jobs, security, acceptance. But those who resisted were pushed to the margins, silenced, marked, labeled as obstacles to progress. I saw churches being forced to conform. Spiritual leaders faced a choice: speak the truth and lose everything, or compromise and keep their influence. Many gave in. Their sermons became watered down, stripped of conviction. They told people what they wanted to hear, not what they needed to know. "God wants unity," they said, twisting scripture to fit the narrative. Love means accepting all things, questioning nothing. But not everyone was deceived. A remnant remained. They saw the lie for what it was. They understood that unity without truth was slavery in disguise. They refused to bow. Even as the pressure mounted, Jesus stood beside me, his face unreadable. "The final test is here," he said. "The time of choosing has begun." And as he spoke, the world split in two. The dividing line was no longer hidden. It was drawn in the open, and everyone had to choose where they stood. Those who remained faithful to the truth faced increasing resistance. They lost jobs, homes, relationships. They were ridiculed, cast out, treated as enemies. "They will hate you because they hated me first," Jesus whispered, and my soul trembled at the reality of his words. I saw Black men and women standing at the forefront of this battle, not with weapons but with unshakable faith. They had been tested for generations, refined through fire, strengthened through suffering. The enemy had tried to erase them, silence them, break them, but they had endured, and now they were leading. Their voices carried weight, their prayers shook the foundations of the earth. I saw miracles happening in their midst, provision in the most unexpected places, supernatural healing, divine protection when all seemed lost. Those who had chosen to stand on the truth found themselves walking in power they had never known before. This is their inheritance, Jesus said. This is what the enemy feared all along. But the other side was growing darker. Those who had accepted the deception became hardened. They no longer questioned. They no longer searched. They had embraced the lie completely. And as they did, something within them changed. They no longer tolerated the truth. They despised it. I saw laws being passed, mandates being enforced. Speaking the truth became dangerous. Believing the truth became costly. And still, the remnant stood. Do not fear what they can take, Jesus said. They can strip away the things of this world, but they cannot touch your soul. His words burned into me, and I knew. This was the moment of testing, the moment of refining. Only those who truly believed would endure. And then, I saw what the enemy had planned next. It was a deception unlike anything before. It was not just about silencing truth. It was about replacing it. The enemy knew that as long as people still sought God, still searched for meaning, they could not be completely controlled. So he introduced a new truth, a manufactured faith. I saw preachers standing on grand stages, their words dripping with false promises. You do not need to suffer, they said. You do not need to wait. Everything you desire can be yours now. Their messages were seductive, wrapped in scripture but stripped of spirit. They promised power without sacrifice, blessings without obedience, salvation without repentance. And people listened. I saw spiritual movements rising, claiming to be from God but carrying no light. They performed miracles, signs and wonders, but the power behind them was not holy. It was a counterfeit, a distraction, a way to keep people feeling spiritual while keeping them from the truth. The world celebrated these movements. Governments endorsed them. Celebrities promoted them. Even churches embraced them. But something was missing. The fire, the presence, the conviction. It was faith without power, worship without surrender. It was a beautiful lie. Jesus turned to me, his expression unreadable. Even the elect will be deceived if they do not remain in me, he said. His voice carried both sadness and warning. Many will believe they are following me, but they are following an illusion. I felt my heart ache. How could this happen? How could so many be led astray? But then I saw it, a remnant within the remnant, those who could not be fooled. They saw the deception for what it was. They refused to follow the counterfeit, even when it meant standing alone. They did not seek miracles. They sought truth. They did not chase comfort. They chased holiness. And because of that, the power of God rested upon them in ways the world had never seen. The enemy had unleashed his final plan, but he had miscalculated, because even in the darkness, the light could not be overcome. And as I watched, I saw the beginning of something the world was not ready for. The world trembled as the battle reached its peak. The deception had spread far and wide, pulling countless souls into its grasp. Governments, churches, and entire communities had fallen under its influence. The enemy had done everything in his power to convince people that they were free when, in reality, they had willingly placed themselves in chains. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. I saw a shaking, a spiritual earthquake that could not be ignored. It did not come from the systems of the world. It did not come from the institutions that had tried to control the narrative. It came from the ground up. It came from the people who had refused to surrender to the lie. It came from those who had been tested, who had suffered, who had been rejected, and yet still held on to the truth. It started in whispers, small gatherings, secret prayers, homes filled with worship that carried a fire unlike anything before. These people were not seeking platforms or recognition. They were seeking God in his purest form. And because of that, he met them with power the world had never seen. I saw healings breaking out in places forgotten by society. I saw food multiplying for those who had been shut out of the system. I saw communities forming, independent of the world's control, thriving because they had chosen to rely on God alone. The remnant was no longer hiding. They were no longer afraid. They had been stripped of everything the world could take, and yet they stood stronger than ever. The fire within them could not be quenched. This, Jesus said, watching them with a look of deep love, is what the enemy feared most. The world tried to ignore them, but they could not be ignored. The deception could not touch them. The lies could not sway them. The pressure could not break them. And as their numbers grew, something even greater began to happen. The light they carried started exposing the darkness. The illusion that the enemy had carefully crafted began to crumble. I saw the system that had been built upon deception begin to shake. Cracks appeared in the foundation. People who had once been blind began to see. I watched as individuals who had believed the lies for so long suddenly felt a stirring in their souls, an unease they could not explain. The truth was pulling at them, and for the first time, they questioned everything they had been told. It was not an easy process. Many resisted at first. The truth was painful. It required them to admit they had been deceived. It required them to let go of everything they had placed their trust in. But as the shaking continued, as the light grew stronger, they had no choice but to confront reality. Some ran from it. Others fell to their knees, weeping as they realized how far they had been led astray. I saw churches that had compromised suddenly faced with a decision. Some repented, returning to the truth with a desperation they had never known. Others clung to their false doctrines, refusing to acknowledge their betrayal. And those who had led people astray, who had knowingly chosen to manipulate and deceive, they were exposed for all to see. Jesus watched it all, his expression unreadable. "The time of exposure has come," he said. "Nothing hidden will remain hidden. The world will know the difference between what is mine and what is not." His voice carried both mercy and judgment. He was giving people a chance, a final chance to turn back, but he would not force them. The choice was theirs. And then, I saw the moment that changed everything. The moment when the system, the deception, the carefully crafted control finally collapsed. The world had believed it to be unshakable, but in an instant, it fell apart. And the fear that had once kept people bound turned into something else: desperation. Because now, they had nowhere to turn but to the truth they had rejected for so long. The shift was undeniable. The very people who had once mocked and silenced the remnant were now seeking them out. They had laughed at their faith, ridiculed their warnings, dismissed their convictions. But now, when everything else had failed, when the illusion had been shattered, they realized that these people, the ones they had cast out, had been right all along. I saw crowds gathering, not for entertainment, not for politics, but for truth. I saw families, once divided, coming back together, seeking restoration. I saw churches that had been lifeless for years suddenly overflowing, not with shallow teachings, but with deep, unshakable conviction. People were no longer asking for comfort, they were asking for transformation. And I saw the remnant, standing strong, ready. They had been tested in the fire. They had been prepared for this moment. They did not gloat. They did not seek revenge. They welcomed those who came with open arms, with the same grace that had been extended to them. "This," Jesus said, "is the restoration." His voice was filled with both joy and reverence. "This is what I have been waiting for." But not everyone would return. There were still those who refused to see, who clung to the lie even as it crumbled around them. They mocked, they resisted, they hardened their hearts. They were so deeply entangled in deception that they could not accept the truth, even when it was right in front of them. I watched as they chose their fate, and a deep sorrow filled me. Jesus' gaze turned toward them, and for the first time, I saw a pain in his eyes that I could not describe. "I never wanted this for them," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "but I gave them the choice." The weight of his words crushed me. This was not a forced awakening. It was an invitation. And some would simply refuse to answer. The world was no longer the same. The war had been fought, not with weapons, but with truth. The deception had been broken. The remnant had risen. And yet, I knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding with everything I had seen. "What happens now?" I asked. His eyes met mine, filled with both love and power. "Now," he said, "they must decide who they will become." It was not just about breaking free from deception. It was about stepping into purpose. Those who had awakened were not meant to simply exist. They were meant to lead, to build, to restore. "Tell them," Jesus said, his voice carrying a divine urgency. "Tell them they have been chosen for this time. Tell them they were made for more." I felt the truth of his words reverberate through my very being. This was the moment the enemy had tried to prevent. This was why he had fought so hard to keep them blind. Because once they knew, once they truly knew, nothing could stop them. Jesus took a step back, the light around him growing brighter. "It is time," he said. "Go and tell them." His voice echoed in my soul, and in an instant, everything around me faded. The vision disappeared, the presence of heaven dissolved, and I felt a familiar sensation, a pulling, a rushing. And then, I gasped for air. I was back. I lay there, my chest rising and falling with shaky breaths. The beeping of hospital monitors filled the room, the scent of antiseptic in the air, the muffled voices of nurses and doctors moving around me. But none of it felt real. Not after what I had seen. Not after what I had experienced. I had been sent back for a reason. And now, I had a choice to make. I could stay silent. I could pretend this was just a dream, just my imagination. I could go back to my life as if nothing had changed. But I knew the truth. And once you know the truth, you cannot unsee it. The weight of my mission pressed down on me. Jesus had made it clear. This message was not just for me. It was for all who had ears to hear. If you are here, if you have listened, if something inside you is stirring right now, know this. It is not by accident. You were meant to hear this. You were meant to wake up. The deception is real, but so is the truth. The battle is raging, but victory has already been written. The enemy has tried to keep you from knowing who you are, from stepping into your divine calling. But now you know. Now, the choice is yours. Do not let this moment pass. Do not push away what your heart already recognizes. If you are ready to seek the truth, if you are ready to stand against the deception, if you are ready to walk in the calling that was placed upon you before you were even born, then it is time. Choose to wake up. Choose to rise. Choose Jesus. If this message has spoken to you, if you feel the weight of its truth, then make the commitment today. Seek Him with everything you have. Open your Bible and read with fresh eyes. Question everything the world has told you. Pray with a heart that is ready to listen. Surround yourself with those who are walking in the truth, who will sharpen you, challenge you, and keep you accountable. And most importantly, do not stay silent. Share this message. Be the voice that wakes up someone else. Subscribe to this channel, not just to stay connected, but to stay equipped. This is not just a place for content, it is a place for truth. A place for those who refuse to be blind any longer. Follow, engage, and stand firm with a community that is rising together. And above all else, follow Jesus with everything you have. I don't know your story. I don't know what brought you here today. But I do know this. You are not alone. You are seen. You are loved. And you were made for such a time as this. Until next time, stay strong, stay awake, and never stop seeking the truth. I'll see you soon.